we are phrasing that will become important. And then we will have a number of options. We go typically for 5 options. One of them is the correct answer. The other ones are the distractors. And the design of these distractors, again, will become important. They have to be plausible, principally, but still have to be clearly incorrect. So I've listed some other types of Moodle quizzes at the bottom, but as I say, today we will mainly talk about MCQs. Now, when we are looking at MCQs, they have a bit of a bad press in the educational literature. So we need to have a look at the advantages and disadvantages of MCQs. And certainly one of the main advantages is their convenience. They are very easy to put online, which is in particular important. Now has been important already when we looked at how to do the exams in the summer. And of course, they're automatically marked. That means marks can be compiled very quickly, but there is also the possibility of giving students immediate feedback. And that is where MCQs can also be used quite effectively in formative assessments. A real advantage of using MCQs is that the marking is objective. There is no marker bias because it is automatically done and the answer is either correct or not. Also, something to consider is it's not influenced by the student's ability of writing. And that is important in some cases because not all students are equally able to express themselves in writing. As you will see, we can also use MCQ results very easy in terms of statistical analysis to have a better idea about the efficiency of the test and individual questions. There are, of course, also disadvantages. And one of the things really that we often forget is how much time it takes to design MCQs effectively. And hopefully we get some ideas from what we are discussing later on in the case studies. It's really a problem that, one of the main issues about MCQs is that students have to recognize answers. So what we are assessing is the ability of the students to recognize the correct answer rather than recalling knowledge that they have in their head. There is, of course, the potential for guessing. That's where the design becomes again important. And even though it's not influenced by the students' writing abilities, it is strongly influenced by the students' ability to read and comprehend what they are reading. Now, one of the points that is always is this limit to testing specific cognitive skills. And this is one of the kind of myths that we would like to debunk in the session today. So really it's a question, how limited are MCQs? And can they actually be used effectively in the context of research-informed teaching, in particular also at level 5 and level 6? So when we are looking at Bloom's taxonomy, which I think we all are very familiar with, and looking at the various levels of thinking, then I think everybody appreciates that we can use MCQs when we are looking at remembering. This is what typically MCQs are considered to be most useful for. Maybe also understanding, but there are doubts in the literature how effectively MCQs can be used to apply, to test application, analysis, and evaluation. And this is really what we would like to do in the next minutes, to use the case studies to really look at examples where we believe have quite effectively used MCQs to test these kind of skills. So with that, I will stop sharing for a moment. We'll go over to the case studies. So I will hand over first to Susanne and then later on to you.
up because I believe Frank's slides actually didn't move forward. Yeah? Okay. And do the slides move forward at all? Okay, let's try again. And I think there's some people in the background. So I would be testing for analytical and critical thinking in not only about is the model for development, for changes, as well as biology. Model in MES. The module builds on cell biology, molecular biology, biochemistry, phylogeny taught in the first year of studies. It up with other modules in the second year, such as, for example, research methods, and it also sets the stage for later development module that Frank will talk about towards the end of our presentation, and of course also the BSc Honours project. This module development, it introduces students for the very first time to embryonic, so I mean prenatal development. And these are the learning outcomes that I do not detail, but what I would like to point out is maybe somewhat different to humanities. In sciences, we very much rely on students getting their head around, so they will have to development. There is also an emphasis on learning technical skills. Students will engage in a laboratory practical where they will learn particular manipulation, making annotated anatomical drawings. But you can see here that they will also have to learn about content. So there is an intellectual, an abstract component to this module. And then finally, as you can see where the arrows up, should feel able at the end of this module to discover and also mental strategy. So there is indeed an element of independent thinking and creativity in this module. Now, in this module, we do not just textbook knowledge. To the opposite, we very much introduce experimental evidence, and we want to guide the students towards understanding how experimental evidence is the backbone of any scientific conclusions. The module is delivered by myself and two other experts in the field. So one the head of the Center, also known as the Fox Center, Professor Matt Gill. The three of us are all research active staff, and so the module is informed by our own research and also the research of others in the field of developmental biology. The module typically assesses students' performance in the practical. It also has a contributes to the final marquee. Right? But then an exam that constitutes 50% of the module mark. The final exam, of course, we would always test for knowledge and lectures or workshops, and we do test for this knowledge and understanding by asking students to come and also by how they understand the developmental anatomy of the embryo. But on top of that, there is also an element of is and in order to show students that they can do this, we ask questions where they have to link content, compare and contrast content from. I would like students to demonstrate, they can observe, that they can aiming for really the range of thinking skills. And we asked students to demonstrate this by either analyzing scientific data in the exam or by designing experimental strategies here. You can see that the previous exam format was 30 single correct answer MCQs worth 70%, and then a choice of 1 out of 4 long essay questions worth 30%. Now, owing to the COVID-19 crisis, we had to change this year. So this year we turned everything into MCQs. In the past, we used the MCQ part of the exam mainly but not exclusively to test for knowledge. And we used the long answer question for students to show higher level thinking skills, so deeper understanding and independent thinking. In the long answer questions, we allowed students to score some points to knowledge for the pass mark. But of course, we would always award extra points for synthesis and application. And then finally, extra points for observation, analytical thinking, critical thinking, evaluation, conclusion, and creativity. Now this year, we turned the long answer questions with their subsections into an MCQ. And I will now show you how we did this. So this picture on the right-hand side shows you a set of scientific data in form of pictures of experimental specimen, and the students were given these data and then figure legends to go with the figures. So this is the information that the students could then work upon. The long answer questions ask students to describe particular features of these pictures. They also had to describe here what kind of experiment, for example, was conducted here. And this experiment, you may just be able to see, there's something overlying my slide, but maybe you can see this. This particular experiment eventually led to the formation of an extra leg, so an extra leg here. They also were meant to describe this set of experiments, where you might be able to see that here in this specimen, the limbs were missing. And then finally, they were meant to evaluate what the function of a particular gene in this set of experiments was. So there's a discuss element. I'm using here the color code that I hope you saw earlier. So describe questions ask students to show analytical skills, and discuss questions allow students to show their evaluation skills. So this, of course, was the long answer question. How did we cope with the MCQ? You can see here that we asked MCQ questions as shown there. And you can also maybe see that we asked for particular aspects of the images shown here. So the students still had to observe, to analyze, to compare, and to describe. Asked students to come to terms with the type of experiment that was shown and also to recognize what the outcome was. So these are all questions where students had to analyze and interpret the sets of data showing in figure 2 and figure 3 here. And then finally, you can see that we asked a question where students had to evaluate the data and then come to a conclusion. And this is, of course, an interpret and conclude question. So the idea was that the way how we phrased the questions, they still had to go through the same cognitive processes as previously in their long answer question. Now, of course, you now need to find out whether we achieved what we wanted to achieve. Before we do this, I'm just showing you another collection of questions where we try to do the same thing. So, for example, here is a question where students were meant to identify common features between two processes, or they had to find an experiment that would address a particular scientific question. They had to distinguish between properties. Here they had to do some scientific reasoning to find out and to find the answer to how come that a particular weed killer causes developmental defects. So, but now really, did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? So first, I plotted the content of the MCQ against the content of our various sessions, so our lectures and our workshops. And you can see that typically the MCQ questions asking for knowledge and understanding have one tick against the content of, say, a particular lecture. So here really we wanted students to show that they understand particular facts that we presented in the sessions. But what is shown here in purple, representing the ability to apply knowledge, asks for the synthesis of several sessions. So you can see several ticks, meaning the questions require the students to bring together the knowledge and understanding from several sessions. Likewise, down here, where students were meant to analyze and evaluate, again, they had to demonstrate the ability to work with the content of various sessions, lectures, and workshops. So this shows you that the more ticks there are, the more complex, obviously, we wanted the question to be. This now shows you to which extent our MCQs were able to really test for independent thinking, and to which extent we were able to discriminate between the good and the not so good students. So you can see here again our knowledge question, the questions asking students to show the application of knowledge, and then the higher cognitive skills. You can see here in this column the average facility index, which means the percentage of correct answers. Obviously, where we asked for straightforward facts, the percentage of correct answers was higher than we asked for students to work with data and analyze and evaluate data. So this means in terms of facility, indeed, some questions were more difficult than others. This column here shows you the discrimination index, representing as to how well the best students were able to find the right answer, and therefore the question would have discriminated between the good and the not so good students. You can see that on average, this has been achieved, but when you're looking at the range, you can see that this was not always the case. So we typically aim for a discrimination index of 30 or higher, but you can see that sometimes we have a negative number here suggesting that we did not achieve what we wanted. Now, how did our MCQ fare compared to previous year's exams? Here you can see the percentage of students passing at first attempt, the mean module mark, also see the mean exam mark. What you can see is that compared to previous years here, this year's results are not much different. They are, in fact, as far as the exam is concerned, better. And we believe this has to do with the fact that if we are marking long answer questions, the tendency is to always find something that we can give to not so good students to kind of help them across the pass mark. And for the very good students, maybe we kind of tend to find the hair in the soup. But of course, for an MCQ exam, the marking is unbiased and this problem would not exist. Now, finally, because in science there's always this maybe prejudice that content-heavy modules and modules that rely on exams rather than coursework a lot disfavor females and favor male students. But when you look at our results across the years from 2016 here to that this was not the case. In fact, the females, if all, fared better than the males. So in summary, I think, at least my point of view, we can use MCQs to test for higher order thinking skills. We can also use MCQs to discriminate between the good and the not so good students. We need to pay particular attention to how we phrase the we need to we need to spend more work on finding out how a good and discriminatory question works. And finally, I think we can use the MCQs to make sure that there is no bias introduced into the exam. And with that, I thank you and hand over to Frank again. If I can stop sharing. Stop sharing. And so I mute myself.
Good. So I think I'll just come in very briefly. So thanks, Susanne, and pass over to Julia straight away for her case study, which will involve not only MCQs, but also some other type of testing. So over to you, Julia.
Hello, everyone. I'm just sharing as well. Let's see. So we had to like sort of develop a new approach for one of my models, which I was coordinating, genetic basis. And this year was the first time we actually come up with this assessment, because this module used to be in a teaching block 2, and we had examination at the end in a summer period, but then it has been moved to the teaching block 1. So we were not able to give them like a proper examination, so we had to think of an appropriate coursework to do that. So we came up with the idea of the 2 items, which was the first one was portfolio, and portfolio was consisted of 2 artifacts. The first journal-based learning artifact, which we thought will be quite a good idea to see if students will be able to read the research paper or review paper and then able to answer questions based on that paper. And artifact 2 was a short report on one of 3 pre-seen pedigrees, and it was the both artifacts were in class assessment. And the difference with this examination was that the students had to see everything in. They had the journal-based learning article released to them earlier, so it was released in November. It was available on Moodle. They could go on the link and then read articles or download it straight away. And also the pedigrees, they were genetic-based and inherited diseases. They were also pre-seen, so they were released, but the questions related to those were not released. And artifact 2 included like a short essay questions, which I'm not going to focus on them now. I will only focus on artifact 1, which is the MCQs. And an assessment was in class set up on Chromebooks for this. So the students had to come in class, and they all had to log in, and we set up the Chromebooks in 2 parts. So the students had a link, and they were able to choose which part they wanted to do first, the MCQs or the short essay questions. But once they entered that part, the timer has started, so they were not able to switch between these 2 parts. They had to complete the first and then submit and go to the next one. This is the article. What we've done, we as an example first, because it was the first time sort of exercise for them to do this way. So we introduced an article which I used during the teaching in the previous year, but for that article I only gave the students sort of as a further reading. We'll go with my lecture, but this for this year I converted it and made 15 MCQs, which were very similar in style to the in-class assessment MCQs. And we provided that article, and I created exactly the same quiz online for that, and sort of explain to students that they can practice on that, just to sort of have a go, read the article, see if you're able to find the answers, to practice. This is the way it was created. So we sort of given them the explanation in the part. This is the screenshot Moodle, and you can see the article was available there. And I've put this one for you, sort of for interested. As you can see here, it has a red clock here, so it has not been really downloaded, I would say, from the for the students. So I was sort of thinking, when I checked it first, I was thinking, oh, did they really practice? Did they have a look at that? And it was interesting to find that students did not really do much practice. I had a cohort of 62 students. There were 48 attempts. The completed attempts, which is like from the beginning until the finished submission, and they tried to answer questions. You can see from the Moodle statistics, were only 17. So the release date was 8th or 15th of November. I think here it was 15th of November, and assessment was 13th of January. So the only 5 previews were in the end of December, and the other previews exam. I even had 2 previews, which was 1 hour before the examination. It's interesting because the assessors, when we created this examination, they suggested like to provide students an example, and I can see that not many students actually use that advantage, just to have the example, have the practice. So I think they underestimated how difficult this can be. I think they saw that it can be very easy just to read the article, quickly answer the questions, but they forgot that this was a level 6 examination. So the assessment, the actual assessment was based on a paper, which is, it was inborn errors of metabolism. We had 2 lectures on this topic, and the paper was quite, I would say, interesting paper and a difficult paper, I would say, as well. So you had to read the paper, I would say, 2-3 times to get grips of the paper, but once you try, you will understand there was a lot of knowledge students can get out of that paper. So we provided a printed copy of the paper during the in-class assessment, because that was suggestion from the examination committee as well. They said that it will be much better if the students will have the printed copy. And also on the day when we set up a quiz on Chromebooks, if I put a link available, like to download the paper or to view the paper online, then Johnny said it will not put the Chromebooks in exam mode. So we sort of quickly had to work around and just remove the link, so then the Chromebooks were in exam mode. Otherwise, the students can go, Google whatever they like if they're gonna access the paper in the PDF file. So I think this idea of having printed copy was useful, like helpful to students and useful to us. And also when I collected the papers at the end of the examination, a lot of students have highlighted or written in that paper, which I think it helped them to find the correct answers as well. So then there is some questions from the artifact 1 from the MCQs. So we divided the MCQs in 2 parts, which was the first 10 questions of the MCQs were quite straightforward, and they were 2 points. And the questions were formed in a way that they, once you read in the paper, you're able to locate where this, few couple of sentences on this question, and you can work out the answer. So this question, for example, so this is about the homogeneous genetic effects in the fetus cause severe maternal illness in pregnancy with features of fatty liver and low platelets. So you can see we have 5 possible answers. And if I go now to the paper, try. So this is the paper, and this is the part where you can actually see I've highlighted in the red box. If you read this paragraph here, so you can see this is the association of maternal acute fatty liver. So the students had to read and understand. It was not just a straightforward the question and then you see the exact answer in the paper. You still had to read, like for instance, a couple of sentences like it's here, and work out how they are connected, and then you can get your answer. And you can see the answer here is a C long chain carboxyl CoA dehydrogenase deficiency, and you can see it here mentioned, and then you can work out that this is fetal homogeneity here for this condition. So that is example of sort of simple, more simple, I would say, MCQ. And then the levels added 5 more sort of analytical, difficult questions, which is they demanded more analysis, and mainly it included tables, graph, and simple calculations as well. So, for instance, in this example, this is as well. So we showed the students where they have to go, what they have to do, so like in figure 2, and then they had to go to that figure to find out the answer. And I'll show you from the paper. If you go into the figure 2, you can see this is the figure, and the students had to look and they had to answer the question. So they had to see, okay, so which one is that? So you can highlight it. The answer here is threonine. So you can see this is like a gradual increase in all during all these 3 periods, and the students had to work it out. So that was question worth 4 marks. Sort of 4 marks question. This is a little bit more complicated, so it's good to see if the students can able to read figures as well. And we ask them here if they can show in the figure 1, and they can evaluate how much they recommended daily protein intake, and we're giving them as well the method. As you can see, we have different options for them, which is like I've played with that a little bit to give them different amounts per day and different weeks as well in pregnancy. So then when they go to the figure, they have to work out first of all. So they look at figure C, you can see here. So they have to read it as well. So what is the, where is the actual recommended daily allowance, and what is this, which it says here 97th percentile. So if they go here, they will see this is recommended daily allowance percentile is here, and this is the method we ask them in the question. So now they have to work out this is the 36 weeks in pregnancy and 16 weeks in pregnancy, and they have to estimate the protein. So they're gonna go in and just go try to read. It was in the question approximately, so they can give approximately. If they go back to the question, only answer with anything above 1.5 gram is C. So they cannot really go mistaken, and if they're able to read the dotted line, they should get the correct answer. So this is the two examples, which is of the different complexity of the questions. And in conclusions, I can say that we had to work out, we had to come up with questions, which is I think Susan has mentioned as well, to differentiate the good and not so good students as well. And my statistics are a little bit more simpler. So I just looked at the number of attempts. I had 60 students participated in in-class assessment. So the below 40% pass was 13 students, they failed. And above 70%, I had 11 students. And above 75%, I had here, this is my students as well, who did exceptionally well as well. I think this approach was very, I think, useful for the research review article, so we can actually to monitor how students doing with the independent learning, and also can be used as summative as we use this year. But I think for the next year can be used as the formative. We have to give them extra reading. We can actually set up little quizzes to monitor the engagement with the independent learning within the reading. And also I had now my last few sort of feedback from the students. The example journal-based learning and MCQs were helpful to get the idea of kind of questions that could be asked in assessment. The other was I quite like this second one. It was useful to see if we could out of the article and studying it, and then the exam seems fine, and they said like we can keep that exam, which is I will keep this but not the exam. We'll change in our assessment a little bit the next year, but I will keep this strategy when I'm giving them extra reading on this one. So this is all from me, and it's back to Frank now. I'll try to stop sharing my screen.
Great, thank you very much, Julia. So I will carry on with the last of the case studies. So I will just quickly see if I can share my screen again. Okay, so the last one that we are going to talk about is, again, an MCQ assessment at level 6. It's the module G development, which is run by Dr. Sharp as a Moodle coordinator, Dr. Dietrich, Professor Gien, and myself. It's an optional module for biochemistry and biology students, but it takes nearly 70 students each year. In this module, we have a really strong emphasis on experimental evidence, both the experimental techniques, but also the interpretation of experimental data. It's assessed by a combination of coursework and an exam. And traditionally, the exam was based on essay had questions. We changed it this year for an MCQ with 25 questions, time limited to 90 minutes, which seems to be a lot of time. But when we go to some of the examples, you will see that these questions are complex. When we look at the mark distribution, so what I did here on the plot, I plotted the marks achieved in the test against, for each student, the average mark at level 6. And so what you can see is that there is some sort of correlation between them. Generally, of course, for some students, either level 6 marks in particular, where they have deferrals, are way out. And generally, I think one thing we found is that the mark distribution is wider in the MCQ compared with maybe other types of assessment, which is similar to something that Susanna already mentioned. Now, one thing I would like to really talk a bit more about is what Moodle provides once you analyze your MCQs. And for each MCQ that you're doing, Moodle calculates already quite a number of really useful statistics. And in particular, I would like to focus on the item analysis. So the statistics that you can get for each individual question. And what I would like to focus on is the facility index. Susanna mentioned that already. That's basically the percentage of students who get it right. So that is in a way a measure for the difficulty of the question. There are a number of other scores as well, but what is really informative is the discrimination index. That effectively looks at how many of the good students get the right answer and how many of the weaker students get the wrong answer. What we are looking for is something around 20 to 30%, as Susanna was already mentioning. And then the discrimination efficiency basically is the relation between the facility and the discrimination index, so it depends on both. So this allows you for each of the questions to check whether it does what you intended to do. So I would just like to go through some examples now. So in practice, what it means is what we can do is we can check for flawed questions, and warning signs in particular could be a low facility index. So if really many students get it wrong, and if many students choose one single incorrect option, it could actually mean that there is a fault in the question. But it could also be that it's highly discriminating. So you also check the discrimination index. So if the discrimination index is high, then probably this was just a very difficult question, but maybe that's what you intended to do. If the discrimination index is suspiciously low, then you will really start to look at the question. Look at the steps.
So conclusion, Borneo orangutan.
So I'm breaking up. Is that
of details about how WWF couples up with traffic and the other psyches informing organisations?
Hello, if you've got your mic turned on, could you mute it, please, just so we can hear the presenter? That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it might have been a question, but I don't think it was. Okay, so yeah, so if the discrimination index is suspiciously low, you would go for the look for the question. You would check if you actually have identified the correct answer as correct. Check for phrasing. Maybe also look if there is something conceptually wrong with that kind of question. So let's go through some examples. So the first one is an example where we test for application of knowledge. And so you don't have to read the question in detail. This is really a question where information is in the STEM, but this relates also to lecture content. So people have to relate what they see in the STEM with what they recall from lecture content. And then from that, they have to apply all of that knowledge, their knowledge from the module and the information from the STEM to then answer the question. Now, in this case, the facility index was very high, 70%, so nearly 3/4 of students got it right. But the discrimination index was very high. So what this really indicates is this was an easy question, but it was still highly discriminating. So I think in all of the MCQs that we are doing, we have to have a mix of relatively easy and relatively difficult questions. But even for the easy questions, we have to aim for them being discriminating in that If it's easy, yes, the majority of students should get it right, but in particular, the majority of the good students should get it right, which in this case we had achieved. The next question is an analysis question. So in this case, the students were given a figure, and the figure here represents a particular process. And the process in this case is how we achieve the asymmetry between the left and the right side of the body and what the molecular mechanisms involved are. So these are depicted in a schematic way, and students have to really figure out what is going on here. What is depicted are particular genes interacting with each other, and the students have to figure out, well, what is going on. Once they have done that, they will be able to answer the question. Again, facility index was very high, and the discrimination index was very high. So this is again a question that, even though it looks fairly complex, the students found relatively easy. But it again was we were able to discriminate between the majority of good students and maybe the weaker students who didn't get it right. Now, the next example is an evaluation question. So in this case, we are giving the students the outcome of an experiment. This relates again to content in the lectures, so it should be reasonably familiar, but the students did not get that particular outcome and that particular experiment in the lectures. So this required students to recall some of the factual knowledge that they had, but they also really had to think about what kind of experiment could give the result that is shown in the picture. And they had to then select out of the possible answers the one correct answer that actually would give this particular outcome. Now, this turned out to be a very difficult question. So their facility index is just 28%. So just over a quarter of students got that one right. That is one where you would start to be suspicious that maybe something was wrong. So when you look at it, when you look in this case at the frequency, nearly the same number of students got the wrong answer as the students that got the right answer. So that could indicate that there was a problem with the question. But when we now look at the discrimination index, that is actually very high. So this was just a very difficult question, which was able to discriminate between the top students who got it right and the weaker students who had difficulties with it. Now, what we did was, also Moodle gives you, is a graph that shows the facility index and the discrimination index for all of the questions. And so this really gives you an overview straight away which questions could be problematic. So this shows that even though the examples I showed you were the good ones, where the discrimination index was very high, here in this case, overall, there are some questions where the discriminative efficiency and also discrimination index was low. So I just would like to go to one of those as an example, what something that goes wrong could look like. So here we are looking again at an example of application of knowledge, testing the application of knowledge. So the question is very simple. How would you test that iPS cells induce pluripotent stem cell, a particular cell that can be used, behave like another type of cell, ES cells. So in this case, facility index very high, similar to what we have seen for some of the questions before, but now the discrimination index is very low. So this is an easy but non-discriminating question. So now we have to ask ourselves, well, what could possibly have gone wrong? So there are some problems there in the design of the options and the distractors. So first of all, when you're looking at the length of the various options, the longest one turns out to is the right one. So that already could tempt some students to guess the right answer simply by thinking the longest answer has the most information, so probably that is the right one. The distractors actually are highly unlikely because they talk about ES cells rather than the iPS cells. So that might be too easy for students to pick them out as being unlikely. And one of the distractors might actually trip up some better students, this one here, because there is some element of truth in it, even though it is not a correct answer. So I think when we look at it again, we will rephrase the question and maybe look at the options to see that we can improve that question for next time. So I think in coming to the conclusion, hopefully we have been able to show you that Moodle MCQ quizzes are actually a valuable tool for both formative and summative assessment, and that they can be designed to test higher cognitive skills. We've given you a number of examples for the level 5 and level 6. I should say that similar to what Julia has been discussing for her test, we had run a formative assessment with students before to give them an idea what kind of test is coming up. And compared with the result of the formative test, the summative test was a lot better. So I think students got an idea what we were looking for, and they were starting to engage with that kind of testing, but also the higher level skills required more than maybe they would have otherwise. I think one thing that I would like to emphasize is MCQs are not the answer to everything. I don't think any of us would suggest that MCQs in particular at level 5 and level 6 should be the only assessment tool. They always have to be used in conjunction with other assessments, because in particular, the ability of students to create and construct well. So basically the ability to express themselves, we cannot test with MCQ. So essays, reports, presentations, infographics, anything like that definitely have to be used to complement whatever we do with MCQs. And last not least, I hope I've been able to show you that the statistics that are calculated by Moodle really can help you to evaluate your quizzes and the individual questions and to work towards improving the tests for the future. So I'll leave the links and references up for a little while. So there are some links to the Moodle stats, explanations, calculations. So since it is recorded, you can go back to these later on, and a number of references as well, because we are certainly not the first people to look at the use of MCQs for testing higher cognitive skills. So there's a bit of literature about that as well. So hopefully that was long enough in the recording to pick it up. So I will stop sharing now. And we are able to answer any kind of questions.
Great, many thanks, Frank and colleagues for that presentation. There have been some discussion in the chat about, I suppose, there are technical questions about how you get these statistics. There were some, I think a lot of people liked the look of what you were doing and wanted to see how to do it themselves.
Fantastic. So it's really straightforward. Once you've done your test and you look at the test result, normally you would go straight to results, but actually when you look at this little wheel on the right-hand side in Moodle, you then have the ability to also get access to the stats, to the statistics. What maybe that's something we can do by email, so I can send a brief set of instructions or so to anybody who is interested for that. So I can put something together that maybe we can attach somehow to the recording. So they're looking to Stuart to see if you can work your magic, or maybe we can add something at the end for that. But yeah, it's really straightforward. So basically, once you've done your test, you click on the test. Normally that allows you to view the results, which is what you're mainly interested in. But if you use the little wheel thing on the right-hand side in Moodle, this context-dependent menu, it allows you to access the statistics as well.
Great. Mike, I'm seeing you lurking here as the expert in all things Moodle. Anything to add to that one?
No, and actually, I've known that's there for a while, but I've not understood what it does. So now I've got to. I was able to point to it, but I'm glad kind of I've got a bit of an explanation. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. It's been really interesting.
Cool.
Any other questions from anyone? Feel free to put your video on and put your hand up, or use the hands chat thing. Michael.
Oh, yeah, I did have another question. We've talked a lot about MCQs, multiple choice questions, but have you got any experience using the other question types in Moodle? Because I know it's we've got a raft of question types. I was thinking particularly about when you were showing the diagrams and asking students to answer multiple questions based on particular elements. That lend itself very well to drag and drop markers, because you can identify certain bits within diagrams, which is possibly a broader understanding from the students, because there's luck involved in multiple choices.
Yep. I mean, I start first. So I haven't got experience with that, but today, listening to the H5P presentation, that's certainly something which we would like to do in the future. At least for informative assessments, and see how well it works, and then we can implement it in summative assessments as well. Yes, I think there is a lot more that we can do with that than we have done so far. I totally agree. Julia, did you have any experience with that by any chance?
Yes, I do, because I teach a very specific subject of histology, and it involves a lot of pictures. That H5P workshop as well, which is I have to master now. But what I've done before, the formative and summative quizzes, where I upload the picture, histology picture, and the students will use the drop boxes, so they will have to drop their name on the picture. Also, I use like a different setup. I think they like a short explanation questions. I like those ones as well. Well, I give them a picture and they have to describe the picture. And but they have to type in that box. They can type, and after that they can check their answer against my answer. So, and I like prepare like a model answer for them, and they can actually compare if they got it correct or not. And I will ask them exactly what the cells are on the pictures as well. I think that worked quite well, and these after this COVID thing for our histology test for cells to systems, and we had quite a high number of students. They had practice with that, and I think they really enjoyed that, having their able to actually see the model answer, be able to compare what they answering, and also these drop-in things worked quite well for them. I think that I'm quite happy with those options. Thank you, Mike, for that.
No problems. Just say, Frank, if you do end up wanting to try some of those kind of broader question types, please let us know. I know historically science had some really good experience with quizzes, but if you want to kind of push past what you're doing at the moment, please get in touch. I'll be happy to help you out with that.
Good. Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much. Because I just see Susanna looking at this at the screen for the kind of anatomy questions that we both do in the development model. Again, I think that could be really useful.
Yeah.
I see one question has already been answered about the guide to interpreting these statistics, having a bit more information about it. Yes, there is a link there on Moodle with actually quite detailed explanation. For those of you who want to do the maths, there is even a guide on how they do the calculations, what the equations are behind that. But I didn't really want to explore that in any detail. So.
Any final questions?
Good. I see some more comments. Yeah, I hope that, I mean, all of the examples that we gave you are science-based, but I think principally this kind of asking the questions in a particular way can be applied to a number of different subjects. So I hope that this can be also useful for other subject areas as well.
Yes, and I think the comments are reflecting that there are lots of people from very different disciplines chiming in and saying this would be very useful for them. So thank you to everyone for the presentation. It was really good to have different case studies of how it was used to unpack that. So I think we're done for questions. So thank you all, and thank you all for attending the second day of the festival. We start again at 9 o'clock again tomorrow. So hope to see you all there.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.